My name is Dale Mercer. In 1967, I was 41 years old, working night dispatch for a gravel hauling company out of Yucca Flats, Nevada. My wife Carol had taken our 2 kids to her mother's place in Flagstaff for the summer. Something about the dry heat being good for her mother's lungs, and I was left alone in a town that barely qualified as one. Maybe 300 people, a diner, a hardware store, a post office that doubled as a bait shop, and a 24-hour laundromat called Dunn's Clean that sat at the edge of town where the asphalt sort of gave up and turned back into desert. I used Dunn's every Thursday night, not because I liked it. The place smelled like mineral deposits and old rubber, and the fluorescent light above the third machine from the left had been flickering since Eisenhower, far as I could tell. But it was open, and I worked nights, and Thursday was the only evening my schedule allowed me to sit somewhere for 2 hours without guilt. I'd bring a thermos of black coffee, a transistor radio, and a paperback western that I never actually read. I'd load Machine 4, sit in the orange plastic chair nearest the door, and listen to KVLC out of Las Vegas, a talk radio program called Night Road that ran from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Truckers called in, insomniacs, the occasional angry farmer. It was background noise. It was company. The first odd thing happened on a Thursday in July. I was on my second cup of coffee, Machine 4 spinning through its rinse cycle, when a caller came on Night Road who said he was phoning from Yucca Flats. That got my attention. Nobody called in from Yucca Flats. The host, a smooth-voiced man named Gerald Pruitt, sounded mildly interested. The caller said he was driving through and had stopped at a laundromat, and that there was something in the wall. He didn't elaborate. Gerald tried to follow up, but the line went to static and then dead. Gerald laughed it off. "Crossed wires," he said. "Desert does that to phone lines." I told myself the same thing and drove home. 2 weeks later, August now, they started tearing down the old Hendricks Feed building 2 blocks from Dunn's. It had been condemned for years, brick walls gone soft with age, and whatever water occasionally found its way this far into the Mojave. The demolition crew was a team of 4 men hired out of Barstow, and they started early on a Monday morning. I was sleeping when it happened, but Russ Belcher at the hardware store told me about it that afternoon, with the kind of careful voice people use when they aren't sure whether to be excited or disturbed. When the east wall came down, they found a space between the inner and outer brick, a cavity maybe 18 inches wide and running the full height of the wall, about 12 feet. Inside that cavity, standing upright, was something wrapped in feed sacking. The foreman unwrapped it, which in hindsight was the kind of decision that makes you wonder about a man's judgment. What was inside was a figure, roughly human-shaped, constructed from coat wire and plaster, and what looked like animal hair packed into a shell of dried mud. It had no face in any recognizable sense, but at the top of the form, pressed into the dried mud, were 2 white stones positioned where eyes might be. And scratched into the plaster of the chest, and Russ showed me this, because he'd gone over and taken a look himself, was a name, a full name, Dale A. Mercer. I stood in Russ's hardware store holding a piece of paper where he'd written it down, because he didn't want me to misremember it. My middle initial is A. It has been since birth. There are not a lot of Dale Mercers, and certainly not in Yucca Flats. I asked Russ how old the figure might be. He said the foreman figured the wall had been sealed for at least 30 years, possibly longer. 30 years ago, I had been 11 years old, living in Ohio. I had never set foot in Nevada until 1959. I spent that Thursday at Dunn's trying to reason my way through it. Some coincidence of names. Some other Dale Mercer the wall had been made for, and I was just an unlucky duplicate. I kept the radio on. The laundromat was empty except for me. It usually was that late. The fluorescent light above Machine 3 flickered its usual Morse code nonsense. Outside, The August desert night was 91 degrees and absolutely still. Not enough wind to move a piece of paper. At 12:40 in the morning, Night Road took a call. A woman's voice, older, calm in a way that was not quite right. Too calm, the way people sound when they're describing something terrible in a flat tone, because the alternative is screaming. She said she was calling from a small town in the Nevada desert. She said she'd been watching a man sit alone in a laundromat. Gerald asked her where she was calling from. She said she was outside. She said the man didn't know she was there. She said she'd been watching him for several weeks. I turned off the radio. I want to be clear about what happened next, because I've had nearly 60 years to think about it, and I'm still certain of what I saw. I got up and went to the laundromat's front window, the big plate glass one that faced the parking lot and the road. The parking lot was lit by a single sodium lamp that threw orange light over maybe 30 feet of cracked asphalt. My truck was the only vehicle. The road beyond was dark. The desert beyond the road was dark. There was a woman standing at the edge of the sodium lamp's light. She was at the precise border where orange light became nothing, and she was facing the window. Facing me? She was wearing a dress that might have been white, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She was standing completely still. People fidget. They shift their weight. They look away for a second. She did none of those things. She stood the way the figure in the wall had been standing, fully upright, absolutely static, positioned as if she had been placed there. I did not go outside. I want to be clear about that too. I went to the payphone on the laundromat wall, and I called the Nye County Sheriff's substation. The deputy who answered sounded half asleep, but he said he'd send someone. I went back to the window. She was closer, not walking closer, just closer, the way something in a dream is suddenly in a different position without you seeing it move. She was now perhaps 10 feet beyond the glass, fully within the lamp's light, and I could see that her eyes were open and she was not blinking. Her face was, I won't say she had no face. She had features, but they were arranged with a kind of deliberateness that didn't sit right, the way you can sometimes tell a piece of furniture has been moved because the carpet indentations are in the wrong place, as if the face had been constructed rather than grown. On her dress, in the orange sodium light, I could see that something had been written below the collar. I couldn't read it from where I stood. I did not go closer to read it. The deputy's cruiser pulled into the lot 11 minutes later. I watched the clock on the laundromat wall, because watching the clock gave me something to do other than watch her. His headlights swept across the lot. When they crossed the spot where she had been standing, there was nothing there. He walked the perimeter, checked behind the building, drove a slow loop around the block. He was professionally skeptical, but not unkind. He told me the desert plays tricks at night, mirages, exhaustion, asked if I'd been sleeping enough. I told him about the figure in the wall. He'd heard about it. He said it was probably teenagers, a prank. My name in the plaster was a coincidence. He waited while I transferred my laundry to my truck, and he followed me to my street. I wrote letters to every person I could think of who had left Yucca Flats in the preceding 5 years. People who'd mentioned leaving, people whose forwarding addresses I could find through the post office. 14 letters over 3 weeks. I was looking for anyone who might know something about the Hendricks building, about whatever tradition or practice might have put that figure in the wall. None of them wrote back. Not one. I moved to Flagstaff in September to be with Carol and the kids. I told Carol it was the heat. I sold the truck, got a job driving school buses, never went back. The demolition crew from Barstow, I looked them up 2 years later, when I'd settled enough to be curious without being afraid. The foreman had quit the trade, according to his old company. The other 3, I could only find records for 2. Both had left their last known addresses within a month of the Yucca Flats job. Neither one ever wrote back to me either. I still have the piece of paper where Russ wrote my name down. My middle initial is A. It has been since birth, and whatever was in that wall had known it for at least 30 years before I ever arrived. I cataloged books for 22 years at the Dairyland Regional Library in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. Small branch, 1,200 square feet. The smell of mildew and old binding glue permanently soaked into the carpet. My name is Deanna Hobart, and I'm telling you this because the county records office has informed me, twice now, that the file I am about to describe does not exist, and never did. So I'm the record. It was the autumn of 1994. The leaves off the dairy farms came down early that year, blown sideways by a cold that came up off Lake Michigan without warning. We had a regular patron, a boy named Marcus Ellery, 9 years old, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday after school, while his mother finished her shift at the Sorensen processing plant, 2 miles up Route 28. He was a quiet kid, round glasses, always a Wisconsin Badgers sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. He would read science encyclopedias and sometimes fall asleep with his cheek on a map of the solar system. The first Tuesday in October, Marcus came in and he was different. Not upset, not sick, energized, almost vibrating. He dropped his backpack on the reading table and said, "Deanna, I have a new friend." I asked the natural question, "Where did you meet him?" "At the tower," he said. Now, there was only one tower anyone in Sheboygan County called the tower. It sat on a gravel access road off County Road G, a decommissioned AM radio transmitter tower, maybe 200 feet tall, red and white, rusted at the base, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had been padlocked since 1987 when WDLK went dark. Kids dared each other to touch the fence. Nobody went inside. I told Marcus he should not be going near that fence. He shrugged and said his friend had told him it was fine. The lock was easy if you knew where to push. I asked his friend's name. "He says I can call him Mr. Cord," Marcus told me, perfectly straight-faced. I wrote it off. 9-year-olds have imaginary friends, and even if a real older kid was showing him around, that was a conversation for his mother, not me. I reminded him the library closed at 6 and went back to reshelving the 500s. The following Thursday, Marcus came back, and he knew things he should not have known. I do not mean in a vague way. I mean he sat down across from me at the reference desk and said, "Your sister in Racine, her name is Patricia, and she has a dog named Biscuit that she got in March." I had not spoken to anyone in that library about my sister in months. He said it casually, like reading off a grocery list, and then he opened his encyclopedia like nothing had happened. My hands went cold. I asked him how he knew that. "Mr. Cord told me," he said. "He knows lots of things about people. He said he listens." I told myself it was coincidence. Small county. People talk. His mother might have overheard something at the processing plant. I convinced myself by the time I drove home past the dark fields and the black shapes of the Holstein cow standing in the freezing drizzle. But I started paying closer attention. The next Tuesday, Marcus came in, and there were scratches on his wrists. Not deep, not like self-inflicted harm, more like he had been pressing himself against chain-link fencing. He had a piece of paper folded in his breast pocket, and he kept touching it the way you touch something you're proud of. I asked what it was. He unfolded it carefully on the table. It was a printout, or a photocopy of a printout. The paper was slick in a way that normal copy paper was not, and the text was formatted like a radio broadcast log, the kind with timestamps and signal strength readings. Except the entries were not broadcast titles. They were names. Dozens of names in 2 columns, addresses beside some of them. I recognized 4 names from the county. I recognized my own address. My address. My street number and my rural route designation, correct down to the box number. "Mr. Cord made that for me," Marcus said. He said knowing where people are is how you know they're real. I told Marcus firmly that he needed to show this paper to his mother. I told him Mr. Cord was not a safe person to spend time with. I told him I was going to call his mother at the plant right then. Marcus folded the paper back up and put it in his pocket and said very quietly, "He said you'd say that. He said people who work with records are always trying to take things away." I called the processing plant. No answer. I left a message with a coworker who swore she would pass it on. That night, I drove past County Road G on my way home because I could not stop myself. I slowed at the gravel turnoff. The tower was there in my headlights, just the base of it, the chain-link fence, the padlocked gate. Except the padlock was hanging open. And there was a light at the base of the tower, not electric, something more orange and unsteady, like a lantern. I sat in my idling Buick for 40 seconds. Then I drove home. I am not ashamed of that. There was nothing I could have done alone on a dirt road at 9 at night. The following Thursday, Marcus did not come in. I called his mother that evening. She was confused, and then she was frightened. She said Marcus had told her he was at the library both days that week, Tuesday and Thursday, that he had been coming home smelling like rust and cold air, and sometimes would not eat dinner. She had assumed it was a phase. We called the Sheboygan County Sheriff's Office together from her kitchen phone. 2 deputies drove out to the tower. They found the gate unlocked. They found boot prints, small ones, child-sized, in the frozen mud around the base. Inside the fencing, near the equipment housing, they found an old camping lantern, cold and out of propane, and a folding chair, and a battery-operated shortwave radio tuned to a frequency that, according to the deputy who wrote the report, produced nothing but static with what he described as, quote, "a rhythmic quality," unquote. They also found a logbook, handwritten, 40-plus pages. Names, dates, descriptions of people, their vehicles, their home addresses, their daily routines. My name was in it. My sister Patricia's name was in it. The name of the county records clerk, the deputy's own wife, the school principal. Marcus was found the next morning, asleep in his own bed, shoes still on, wrists scratched, completely unharmed. He said he did not remember how he got home. He said Mr. Cord had walked him to the road. He said Mr. Cord wanted him to say goodbye for him, because now he would find somewhere else to listen from. The sheriff's department held the logbook for 11 days. I know this because the deputy, a man named Carl Britton, called me personally to tell me they were transferring it to the county records archive for documentation. When I contacted the county records office 3 weeks later, they told me no such logbook had ever been received. Deputy Britton had retired, they said, moved out of state. I filed a records request, twice. The case number I had been given returned no file. The tower was demolished in the spring of 1995 by a private contractor. No public notice was posted. The gravel access road off County Road G was gated with a new county lock and a sign that read, "Utility Access." No trespassing. Marcus Ellery moved with his mother to a relative's home in Minnesota in January of 1995. I have no reason to believe he was not fine. But I still have the piece of paper he left on my reference desk the last day he came in. He must have slid it under my stapler while I was on the phone with his mother. It is a photocopy of one page from that logbook. My name is at the top. Below it, in handwriting that is neat and small, and not a child's, are 11 months of my daily movements, every Tuesday and Thursday. What time I arrived, what time I left, what I was wearing, which route I took home. The entries stop on a Thursday in October 1994. The last line reads, "She is aware now. Let the boy go. Move the receiver." The WDLK tower had been offline since 1987. Whatever was using it had been there for at least 7 years before Marcus ever touched that fence. And somewhere in this state, on some frequency I cannot find and do not want to, something is still listening.